They called her Queen Velara, ruler of the Zinari Empire, powerful, proud, and utterly alone. She sat upon a throne of cold crystal, surrounded by silence and fear. Every alien in her empire bowed to her name, yet no one dared to look into her eyes. They said her stare could cut through steel. They said her heart was colder than the void between stars. But long before she was a queen, Velara had been something else, a daughter, a dreamer, a woman who once believed in kindness. That was before the great betrayal, when her closest council turned against her. They accused her of weakness for showing mercy to conquered worlds. They killed those she trusted most and left her with nothing but power and pain. Since that day, she ruled with an iron heart. No warmth, no laughter, only duty. Her empire stretched across 10 star systems, yet her palace felt emptier than a tomb. The halls echoed with whispers that she could no longer sleep, that she stood alone on her balcony each night, staring at the stars, as if searching for someone long gone. No one dared to approach her anymore. No suitors, no advisors who weren't afraid of her wrath. To most, she was not a woman. She was a weapon, and then came the humans, the Galactic Union, desperate to keep peace among its many races, decided to send a representative from Earth, a young species, known for their stubbornness and empathy. His name was Captain Elias Monroe, a decorated officer with a reputation for courage and compassion. He had survived wars, storms, and losses, but nothing could prepare him for the woman they called the Queen of Shadows. When Elias first stepped into her throne room, he felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. The air was thick with tension. The guards stood still, their faces hidden behind silver helmets. The room was vast, cold, and filled with a faint hum of alien machinery. At the far end, upon her high throne, sat Velara. She was breathtaking, but not in the way humans often meant. Her beauty was sharp, almost dangerous. Her skin shimmered like molten silver, her eyes glowing faintly with pale light. Her voice, when she spoke, was deep and smooth, echoing through the chamber like a forgotten song. "So," she said, her tone neither kind nor cruel, "the Union sends a human to speak for them." Elias bowed, trying to hide the way his heart raced. "It's an honor to meet you, Your Majesty." She studied him for a long, silent moment. "You are small," she said finally, "and fragile. Do they think my empire can be moved by soft words and human sentiment?" Elias looked up at her, not flinching. "Maybe not. But sometimes, Your Majesty, even soft words can move a mountain if they're spoken with truth." A few guards shifted, expecting the Queen's wrath, but instead Velara tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand this strange, fearless human. "You speak boldly," she murmured. "Most tremble before me." "Then maybe they don't see what I see," Elias replied quietly. Her silver eyes narrowed. "And what is it you see, human?" He hesitated. "A woman who carries more pain than any throne should demand." For the first time in many years, Queen Velara's breath caught. No one had spoken to her like that, not since before the betrayal, before her heart turned to stone. The silence that followed was heavy. The guards looked uncertain, waiting for her to strike him down for his insolence, but she didn't. Instead, she rose slowly from her throne, her long cloak whispering across the crystal floor. She stepped closer, close enough for Elias to see the faint lines of exhaustion on her face, the scars hidden behind beauty and armor. "You are either very brave," she said softly, "or very foolish." "Maybe both," he said with a small, honest smile. Her lips curved, just slightly, a motion so brief and fragile that it vanished almost before he saw it. But it was there. That tiny human smile in the face of her coldness did something strange to her chest. A flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. A warmth, a pull, a dangerous curiosity. When the meeting ended, Velara dismissed the guards but kept her gaze on him as he turned to leave. Something in his eyes had disturbed her. No, awakened her. And that night, as she stood on her balcony once again, watching the stars burn quietly above, she found herself whispering his name under her breath. Elias. It had been a long time since anyone had dared to look at her without fear. A longer time still since anyone had spoken to her like a person, not a queen, and in the quiet of her lonely palace, the Queen of Shadows felt the first spark of something dangerous, something she didn't yet understand. She didn't know it then, but she had already begun to plan. because the human who had looked into her soul without trembling, she would make him hers. The next morning, Elias was summoned again. The guards came to his chamber early, their silver armor gleaming in the soft light. "The Queen demands your presence," they said. Their tone made it sound less like an invitation and more like a warning. Elias straightened his uniform, took a deep breath, and followed them through long corridors made of living crystal. The palace seemed alive, walls humming softly as if whispering secrets from centuries past. He felt small in this alien world, yet something inside him refused to bow to fear. When the doors opened, Queen Valara was already waiting for him. She sat upon her throne, but this time the room was empty. No guards, no servants, just her and him. "You came alone," Elias said carefully. "I sent them away," she replied, her voice calm but unreadable. "They distract me," he smiled faintly. "Or perhaps you don't want them to hear what you're going to say." Valara's eyes glimmered. "You are bold, human. That can be dangerous here." "Maybe," he said softly. "But you didn't call me here to be silent, did you?" Her expression changed slightly, almost amused. "You think you know why I summoned you?" Elias shook his head. "No, but I think you want to understand something." Valara rose from her throne, her tall, elegant frame casting a long shadow across the marble floor. As she walked toward him, the air grew heavy. She stopped just a few feet away. Her silver gaze locked onto his brown human eyes, studying him as if he were a strange creature. "Your kind is unpredictable," she said. "You speak of peace but carry weapons. You show compassion but destroy what you love. You build alliances and betray them." He didn't flinch. "And yet somehow we keep trying." That answer made her pause. The faintest flicker of curiosity touched her cold features. "Trying?" she repeated. "Yes," Elias said. "Because even when we fail, we hope. It's the only thing that keeps us human." Valara turned away, her cape trailing like a stream of darkness behind her. "Hope," she whispered almost to herself. "A useless emotion. It blinds the weak, or saves them," Elias replied quietly. She stopped walking. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched thick with things unspoken. Finally, she looked over her shoulder. "You speak to me as if I am not your queen." "You're not my queen," he said gently. "But you are someone who carries too much pain to listen to silence any longer." That struck deeper than any insult. Her hands tightened slightly and the glow of her eyes dimmed for a second. "You." Days turned into weeks, and the human, Captain Elias Monroe, continued to meet with Queen Valara under the pretense of peace discussions. But the meetings were no longer about treaties or politics. The Queen, who once silenced entire rooms with a glance, now sat quietly as Elias spoke about Earth. He told her about rain, how it smelled, how it felt against skin. He told her about oceans, laughter, and how humans sang even when their hearts were broken. She listened, truly listened, her silver eyes softening each time he spoke. It was strange. No one dared to speak so freely in her presence, and yet she never interrupted him. Sometimes she asked questions. "Why do humans touch each other so much?" she once asked, her tone more curious than cold. Elias smiled gently. "Because we need to remind each other that we're not alone. Touch is comfort." Her gaze drifted toward her own hand covered in delicate armor. "Comfort," she repeated quietly, as if the word itself was a fragile thing she might break. "I have not known that for a long time." That night, Valara stood before her mirror and studied her reflection. The silver crown on her head felt heavier than usual. The power she once wore like armor now seemed like a chain. She touched her own cheek, wondering what it would feel like to be touched not out of duty, not out of fear, but with kindness. For the first time in centuries, the great Queen of Zynar felt lonely. The next day she called for Elias again. When he entered, he noticed something different. The Queen was not sitting on her throne. She was standing by a large window watching the stars drift past. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "Human," she said, not unkindly. "You speak of beauty in small things, songs, laughter, touch, yet you come from a world of war. How do you still believe in such softness?" Elias walked closer, his steps slow, respectful. "Because if we stop believing in small things, the big things destroy us. Pain, loss, they don't stop. But neither does hope." Valara turned to him, her glowing eyes searching his face as if she was trying to find the secret to that hope. You speak like a fool, she said softly. And yet, I envy you, he smiled faintly. Maybe fools are what this galaxy needs sometimes. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked closer until only a breath separated them. Elias could feel the heat of her presence. Strange, alien, yet oddly human. Her hand lifted halfway before she stopped herself, fingers trembling. If I were not a queen, she whispered, I think I might have liked to be someone else. Who? Elias asked gently. Someone who is not feared, she said. Someone who can be seen. Elias looked into her eyes. I see you, Velara. Her lips parted slightly, and for a heartbeat, the mighty queen looked almost fragile, like a woman standing at the edge of her own heart. But then the moment passed. She stepped back quickly, her composure returning like a blade sliding into its sheath. This conversation never happened, she said, her tone hard again. Return to your quarters. Elias bowed slightly. As you wish, Your Majesty. But as he turned to leave, she called out softly, almost pleadingly, Elias. He stopped, waiting. Do not stop speaking of your world, she said. It reminds me of something I thought was lost. That night, Velara couldn't sleep. The echo of his words kept replaying in her mind. I see you. No one had said that to her since before the great betrayal. Everyone saw the crown, the power, the fear, but not her. She walked alone through her palace halls, her bare feet touching the cold metal floor. Servants bowed as she passed, but she barely noticed them. She paused in the garden, a vast dome filled with glowing alien plants. Once she had planted them for peace. Now they were the only living things that stayed near her without fear. Elias Monroe, she whispered again, her voice trembling. Why do your words reach me when nothing else can? A single tear slipped down her silver cheek. It shimmered like a falling star before vanishing. Deep down, Velara knew something dangerous was happening inside her, a feeling she had buried long ago. It wasn't just curiosity or admiration. It was something deeper, something terrifying. The human had touched the part of her she thought had died. And as the night passed, she realized a truth that frightened even her. She no longer wanted to rule the galaxy. She wanted to understand the man who made her feel alive again. The queen everyone feared was beginning to feel like a woman again. And deep within that awakening heart, a silent promise began to form. If the universe would not let her have peace, she would make it hers. Peace in the royal palace of Zynar was fragile, like a glass ready to break at the slightest touch, and lately that glass had begun to tremble. The queen's guards noticed the change first. Their ruler, once cold and distant, now spoke softly when the human was near. Her sharp eyes, which used to strike fear into even the bravest soldiers, now softened whenever Captain Elias Monroe entered the room. The whispers started small. The queen has gone weak. The human controls her. He poisons her mind with earth words and false dreams. But whispers in the shadows of power grow fast. Soon, her council, the same council that once betrayed her heart but not yet her throne, began to plot once more. They called her private moments with the human a disgrace. To them, humans were nothing more than primitive beings, unfit to stand beside their queen. They planned to correct her before her heart cost them their empire. One night, Elias walked through the palace corridors, his footsteps echoing against the silver floors. He had just left a meeting with Velara, where she had listened to him speak about the human concept of forgiveness. She had smiled faintly and said, You humans are strange creatures. You break easily, yet you heal just as quickly. It was the first real smile he had ever seen from her, a smile that still haunted his chest like a heartbeat. But as he turned a corner, something felt wrong. The lights flickered. The air grew cold. Then came a shadow, fast, silent, and deadly. A blade flashed. Elias moved on instinct, ducking just in time, but the second strike caught his shoulder. Pain burned down his arm as he fell backward. The attacker, dressed in dark armor, raised the weapon again. And then the air itself screamed. A surge of blue energy tore through the corridor, throwing the assassin across the wall. The smell of burned metal filled the air. Elias looked up and saw her. Queen Velara stood in the doorway, eyes blazing like twin stars. The floor beneath her feet cracked under the force of her power. She raised her hand, and the assassin's weapon melted in his grip. You dare, she hissed, her voice shaking the walls, to spill blood in my halls? The guard tried to speak, to beg, but his words never came. In a flash of light, he was gone. Silence followed. Elias, still bleeding, stared at her in shock. "You saved me." Velara turned to him, her power fading. "They tried to end what they fear," she said, her tone heavy with rage and sadness. "I should have known they would not accept you." She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she touched the wound. For a queen who had seen thousands die, the sight of one man's blood shook her deeply. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered. "You make me weak." Elias smiled faintly, even through the pain. "Or maybe I just remind you you're still alive." Her eyes met his, full of storm and sorrow. She pressed her glowing hand to his wound, and warm light spread through his body. The pain began to fade. "Your healing tech is impressive," he murmured. She shook her head. "That wasn't tech. That was me." He blinked in surprise. "You can heal?" "Not often," she admitted softly. "Only those I choose to keep." Later that night, the queen stood before the council chamber, her face hard and unreadable. The surviving ministers knelt before her, pretending loyalty but hiding fear in their eyes. "You will not touch him again," she said. "The human is under my protection." "Your Majesty," one dared to speak, "he is a threat. He clouds your judgment. You risk everything, our empire, our pride, for a mortal creature." Velara stepped forward, her cloak whispering like thunder. "Do you think me blind? You plot in shadows while I hold this empire together. You think my heart makes me weak?" Her eyes glowed brighter. "Then remember this, mercy is not weakness. It is strength that cowards will never understand." No one dared to reply. She turned and left the room, the heavy doors closing behind her with a soft hiss. Later, alone in her private chambers, the queen stood on her balcony, the stars stretching endlessly beyond her reach. Below her, the city lights flickered like small, fragile hearts. She thought of Elias, of his bravery, his foolish honesty, his human warmth. She thought of how close she had come to losing him. Her hands clenched against the railing. "Never again," she whispered. The Queen of Shadows had made her decision. If her people would not accept the human who reminded her what it meant to live, then she would change them, or burn the stars themselves trying. Because in her heart, something had already shifted beyond control. The alien queen everyone feared was no longer just fighting for her empire. She was fighting for him. Days passed since the attack on Elias, but the memory stayed alive in Queen Velara's heart like a burning wound. Every time she looked at him, the image of his blood on the crystal floor returned to her mind. She had saved him, but it was not enough. Saving him once did not mean he was safe forever. The council still watched her, their whispers growing louder behind closed doors. They feared the human's influence. They feared what the queen might become if she listened too closely to her heart. But Velara had stopped fearing them long ago. Now she feared only one thing: losing the man who had reminded her what it meant to feel. So she began to plan. It started in silence during long nights when the palace was asleep. Alone in her private chamber, she stood before her holographic desk, watching records from Earth. Images of human traditions flickered before her: weddings, dances, small gestures of love. She watched how humans exchanged rings, how they made promises not of power but of care. She didn't understand it fully, but she wanted to. Each night, she watched and learned. She memorized the way humans smiled when they loved. She even practiced words of affection in secret, her voice soft and unsure. "I care for you," she whispered to the empty air. "You are mine." Then she would shake her head, embarrassed by her own weakness. But she kept trying. Elias, meanwhile, was slowly healing. The queen had ordered the best medical care for him, though she herself visited often, always when the guards were gone. She would come quietly, her cloak trailing behind her like a shadow, and sit beside his bed. At first she said nothing, just watched him. Sometimes she brought strange alien fruits, claiming they would help human recovery. Elias would smile and take them, even though half of them tasted like bitter metal. One night, as she placed a glowing fruit on the table, he asked softly, "Why do you keep coming here, Velara?" She froze, her back turned to him. "Because you are my guest," she said after a pause. "Guests don't usually get royal attention every night," he said with a tired grin. She turned then, meeting his eyes. Her voice was quieter, fragile. "Perhaps you are not just a guest." The room went silent. The hum of alien lights filled the air. Elias felt his heart skip a beat. "Then what am I?" he asked carefully. Velara looked down, almost shy for the first time. You are a reminder of what I used to be, of what I still could be. He wanted to say something, but the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't the cold gaze of a ruler. It was the gaze of someone lost, someone desperate to hold on to a feeling she didn't know how to name. When Elias was strong enough to walk again, the queen summoned him to the royal gardens. It was a sacred place hidden from the public, glowing with strange blue plants that shimmered like stars. No outsider had ever been allowed there before. As he entered, she stood waiting under a tree that sparkled with white energy. She wore no crown today, only a simple robe of silver. For the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like a woman. I wanted you to see this place, she said. This garden is the only thing I created with my own hands. Every flower here grows from light, not soil. It's beautiful, Elias whispered. It is lonely, she corrected gently. Like me. She reached out, her fingers brushing one of the glowing petals. I built this place to remember life, but it never felt alive. Until you came. Elias stared at her, unsure how to respond. There was something in her voice. Something almost human. Then she turned to him, holding something small in her hand. It was a pendant made of silver crystal, shaped like a fragment of her crown. This, she said softly, is part of my past. I broke it myself. I wish to give it to you, he frowned. Velara, that's a piece of a queen's soul, she finished. In Zinari culture, it is given only once. To the one we choose to protect above all else. Elias stood frozen. You're giving this to me? She nodded. You saved me from my silence, human. I have lived surrounded by power, but you gave me something stronger. Peace. He looked at the pendant in her hand, glowing faintly with her life energy. Velara, why me? Her answer was barely a whisper. Because you are the only one who looked at me and did not see a monster. Slowly, he took the pendant from her. Their hands touched, warm against cold metal. A strange connection pulsed between them, soft but powerful. Velara's eyes shimmered with emotion. In your world, they make promises with rings, she said. In mine, we bind hearts with light. The moment hung between them, silent, glowing, eternal. And as the stars above the garden burned softly, Elias finally realized that this woman, this feared, untouchable queen, was no longer the creature everyone had rejected. She was someone who had been waiting her entire life for someone to simply see her. And now, she had chosen him. The days that followed were quiet but not peaceful. The palace still shone with its usual cold beauty, but an invisible storm brewed beneath its walls. The council was restless. The soldiers were uneasy, and the whispers about the queen and her human guest had spread across the empire like wildfire. Meanwhile, deep within her private chambers, Queen Velara found herself pacing more than ruling. Every thought, every heartbeat seemed to circle back to one name, Elias. He was changing her world without even trying, and the galaxy was starting to notice one morning. As the twin suns rose over Xenar's crystal horizon, a message came from the Galactic Union. The Human Council had demanded that Captain Elias Monroe return to Earth immediately. They claimed his personal involvement with the alien queen had compromised diplomatic neutrality. When Elias received the message, his heart sank. He knew it was only a matter of time before they pulled him away. Yet he also knew that leaving wouldn't be easy, not anymore. He went to see her. Velara stood near her balcony when he entered. She didn't turn around. She already knew why he had come. The air between them felt heavy, filled with all the words neither of them wanted to speak. They're calling me back, he said quietly. I know, she replied without turning. The Union fears what they cannot control. He took a deep breath. Velara, if I stay, it could cause war. War? She repeated softly. There is already war inside me. Elias walked closer. You've done more for me than anyone ever has. But if I stay, they'll destroy what you've built. Finally, she turned to face him. Her silver eyes glowed faintly, but her voice was trembling. Let them destroy it. What is an empire worth if I cannot protect what I love? Her words froze him. She had never said that before, love. It was a word so simple, so human, and yet from her lips it carried the weight of stars. Velara, he began, but she raised her hand, stopping him. I will not beg you to stay, she said softly. You are not my prisoner. You are free to go. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed her. Behind the silver light, tears shimmered like molten glass. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If I go, and what happens to you? She looked away. I will return to what I was. A ruler without warmth, a queen without a heart. The galaxy will call me strong again. And you'll believe them? He asked gently. Her lips trembled. No, but I will pretend. That night, Elias packed what little he had brought to Zynar. The pendant she had given him lay against his chest, glowing faintly as if alive. He thought of everything they had shared, the garden, her laughter, her pain. The woman behind the crown, but duty called, and he was still a soldier. When he stepped into the royal hall one last time, Velara was waiting for him. Her throne loomed behind her, but she didn't sit upon it. She stood in front of it, just Velara, not the queen, not the legend. This is goodbye then, she said quietly. He nodded. For now. Her gaze dropped to the pendant around his neck. You still wear it. I don't take gifts like that lightly, he said with a faint smile. Something inside her broke. She wanted to tell him to stay, to lock the palace doors and never let him leave, but that would be selfish. She had already taken enough from the universe, so she only whispered, Go before I change my mind. Elias took one last step toward her. He lifted her hand gently and pressed it against his chest. You'll always be here, he said softly. No matter how far I go. Her breath caught. And you, she said, placing her other hand over her own heart. We'll be here. They stood like that for a long, silent moment, two beings from different worlds, bound by something neither could explain. Finally, he turned to leave. The doors opened slowly, and the cold light of the corridor spilled in. But before he stepped through, her voice stopped him. I cannot let you go, she said suddenly. He froze, turning back. Her eyes burned brighter than ever, her expression fierce and desperate. I told myself I would let you leave, but I cannot, she said, stepping closer. Do you not see, human? I was planning to make you mine, not through power or fear, but through bond. Through choice. Elias's chest tightened. Velara, I wanted you beside me, she continued, her voice breaking. Not as a subject, but as my equal. My heart chose before I could stop it. She reached for him then, her hand trembling slightly. Tell me, Elias Monroe, would you have stayed if I had asked? He looked at her for a long time, emotion caught in his throat. Then softly he said, You never needed to ask. For the first time, the Queen of Zynar closed her eyes and allowed a tear to fall, not of pain, but of release. The palace of Zynar was quiet after the storm. The halls that had once echoed with whispers of betrayal and fear now carried a different sound, the soft hum of life returning. Queen Velara walked alone through her chambers, her silver cloak trailing behind her. She had faced assassins, whispers, and the demands of the Galactic Union, but none of that compared to the emptiness she had felt when Elias had almost left her world forever. She stopped in the grand garden, the place where she had first shown him the glowing blue flowers that thrived in alien light. For the first time, she allowed herself to remember the nights they had spent talking here, about everything and nothing. His laughter still seemed to echo among the petals. Velara touched a flower, her fingers trembling. I almost lost him, she whispered to herself. The words were soft, but they carried the weight of centuries. I cannot bear to be without him. It was true. The human had changed her life in ways she had never imagined. She had ruled empires and crushed rebellions, yet Elias Monroe, simple, stubborn, brave, had undone the walls she had built around her heart. He had reminded her what it meant to feel alive, to feel love, and to feel hope. Her chest ached with a mixture of pride and fear. Pride that she had survived the centuries alone, and fear that the human who had taught her to feel could be taken from her. And then, she saw him, Elias, returning to the palace, not as a visitor, not as a diplomat, but as someone who had made a choice. He walked slowly, cautiously, as if afraid she might vanish. Velara, he said softly, stopping a few steps away. I could not stay away. Not after all you gave me. Not after everything. Her eyes shimmered with emotion she could not hide. You were gone, she whispered. I thought I had failed you. I thought I had lost you forever. You didn't lose me, he said, stepping closer. You reminded me why I fight, why I believe, and why I stay. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. No words, no crowns, no titles. Just two souls standing in the soft glow of the garden. connected by something deeper than reason or logic. Then, with a courage that surprised even herself, Velara stepped forward. Her hands found his, warm and solid. "I feared that love was weakness," she said, her voice shaking, "but I see now it is strength. Greater than all the power I have ever held." Elias smiled gently, "And I see that even the strongest queen can be human too." Her eyes glistened. "I want you here with me. Not as my guest, not as my human ambassador, but as my equal. My heart has chosen Elias Monroe, and it will not choose anyone else." He lifted her hands to his chest, feeling the pulse of her life. Strong, steady, real. "Then you have me," he whispered. "In every way that matters." Velara's lips trembled as she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, the alien plants around them glowing as if celebrating the bond that had formed. For centuries she had ruled alone, feared and revered, but in that moment she felt something she had thought impossible. Peace. The council, the whispers, the universe itself. They could not touch what had begun here. They could never understand the choice of a queen who had decided that love was worth more than power. And so they stood there, hand in hand, hearts beating together. Two beings from different worlds bound by courage, trust, and an impossible bond that defied fear, logic, and even time. Velara finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Let them whisper, let them judge. Let the galaxy fear me if it must. But no one will ever say that I am alone again." Elias pressed a gentle kiss to her hand, then looked into her glowing silver eyes. "And as long as I breathe, you will never be alone." The stars of Zynar shone brighter than ever, the palace alive with the quiet hum of life and love. The queen everyone had feared, rejected, and doubted had found something stronger than her empire. She had found a heart that mirrored her own. And together, they would face the galaxy, not as ruler and subject, not as alien and human, but as equals, as partners, as something more powerful than either could have imagined. For the first time in centuries, Queen Velara smiled openly, and it was no longer fragile or fleeting. It was a smile of triumph, not of power, but of the heart. She had won in a way the universe could never predict. She had won love.